Unprotected by Brett Nelson. Chapter 7. I don't care what anyone else says, this is not a good thing, screamed Wally, the town's lone dump truck owner. I'm not giving up my guns, said Sally, the bakery owner. Who does our government think they are? Tom, the mailman, growled. Government overreach? That's what this is. Sheriff Connor's eyes swept over the town hall that was jam-packed without a single empty chair. Every standing space was full. Before the meeting, he had bickered with Fire Marshal Clinton Abbott about the number of people crammed into the building, which currently far exceeded the maximum building capacity. He had grudgingly agreed to turn a blind eye this one time due to the important nature of the topic at hand. He had never seen such a well-attended town meeting, and he had lost control. Excuse me, everyone. He raised his voice to be heard over the angry mob of people who spoke over one another. The room was a war of unbridled mutiny. If you all could just keep quiet so we can have an orderly meeting. Peter, the gas station clerk, stood to his feet. I'm a law-abiding citizen who wants to protect my family. This is unfair of them to expect us to... He stood behind the podium and waved his hands in an erratic fashion because nobody was listening to him. Everyone, please calm down. We can't have a productive meeting if everyone speaks out of turn. Well, if they think I'll give up my gun, they've got another thing coming to them, said LaShawn, the vape store owner. Over my dead body will a corrupt government who's up to no good take my guns. Ellen, the otherwise timid Sunday school teacher at the Baptist church, raised her fist in the air. President Thompson can bend over and kiss my... He shook his head and was about to scream again when an ear-piercing whistle plunged the room into silence. James removed his fingers from his mouth. I know everyone is upset and scared, but we all need to hear what the sheriff has to say. We accomplished nothing without the proper decorum. He returned his attention to Sheriff Connor with a sheepish grin as he took his seat. Connor gave James a nod of thanks, then refocused on the crowd while it was quiet. Now listen, people. Like James just said, I know everyone is upset by the recent announcement of the revised gun laws. It's a freaking coup by a bunch of privileged, overreaching... Connor cut his eyes over at the speaker, a well-respected middle school teacher. Eric, sit down and shut up. He looked over the crowd with a hardened expression. There will be no more outbursts. Is that understood? A slurry of angry murmurs filtered across the room, followed by silence. I get that you're all upset about this. Trust me. I'm just as upset about it as you are. But all these angry outbursts aren't helpful to an already stressful situation. I promise I'll carve out some time at the end of the meeting to open the floor. I want to give as many of you as possible the chance to ask questions and make comments. Several in the crowd gave terse nods in his direction. Now I'm afraid I don't have a great deal of information right now. I may not be able to answer all your questions, but I'll share with you what I know. Rest assured, within the next few days, plenty of information will trickle down from the ranks of our government. Another wave of murmurs flowed, then quieted within seconds. I've received my first of many communications about the gun confiscations. Today is Tuesday, August 9th. By next Friday, August 19th, we are directed to have drop-off points set up in town and ready to accept illegal guns. Does that mean we can keep our registered guns? Those aren't illegal, right? Asked a woman with a hopeful voice. Please hold all questions and comments until I open the floor. To answer your question, though, Kalitha, under the new constitutional amendment, all guns are considered contraband. Therefore, they're all illegal now. Whether your guns are registered or not, you must bring them to the drop-off points. He waited a few seconds for another swarm of animated whispers to abate. Per federal regulation, to ease the burden of turning in your guns, towns are to have one drop-off point per 5,000 citizens, which means our town will have 2 drop-off points. Unfortunately, this will be a slow and agonizing process, so in advance, we ask that you be patient with everyone involved. Nobody wants to stand outside in the 90-degree heat for hours to turn in their guns. But it can't be helped. It may be slow going at first, but once we start, hopefully we can streamline the process to make it as painless as possible for everyone. Tom jumped to his feet. There'll never be anything painless about a Nazi government taking away our rights to own a gun. Everyone in the room jumped to their feet in deafening applause and whistles of support. Sheriff Connor thrust his arms into the air. Everyone, please settle down. Sorry for the outburst and for provoking everyone, Sheriff, Tom said when the frenzy was over. He sat back in his chair with an angry but repentant expression. The government has given 1 month for citizens to relinquish their guns, so all guns in town must be in our possession by midnight, September 19th. Unfortunately, that's about all the information I can give. But I'll have a town hall meeting every evening, if needed, to pass along all relevant information. Hundreds of hands shot into the air, and a foghorn of voices filled the cramped space. He raised his hands until silence fell across the room. It's just after 9. I'll take as many questions as I can until 10 o'clock. Again, please understand that I only have limited information, so I may not be able to answer every question. Within the next day or two, though, we should know much more. He pointed across the room. George? A silver-haired man in tan dockers and a polo shirt stood to his feet. Thank you, Sheriff. Are we as a town expected to build our own so-called drop-off points? Because that could be a lot of funds that our town can't afford. Good question, George. We're required to build nothing. As you can imagine, gun confiscation will require lots of space. The federal government will ship to every township the appropriate number of collapsible buildings for us to use. All that's required is that we provide large enough properties on which to set them up. We need large areas to safely accommodate the in and out flow of the hundreds of people a day. The last thing we need is to gridlock our town, so it will take some creative thinking on our part. Enoch Wallace stood and pointed a beefy finger. You got another thing coming to you, Connor, if you think I'll give use of my property to help the government steal our rights right out from under us. Unfortunately, you may not have a choice, Enoch. Federal regulations stipulate that during the confiscation period, towns have the right to temporarily seize any property they need to set up the drop-off point. On the plus side, they're offering a stipend to landowners who allow use of their property for the month in question. The man's face turned red, and he spat a series of profanities. First they take our guns, and now the federal government can seize our property without our consent to fulfill their dirty deeds? Screw them and their measly stipend. What's next, Connor? They rip our homes out from under us and then make us rent it back from them? For the love of goodness, Enoch, don't give our crooked government any ideas, a woman said, which brought a trickle of uncomfortable laughter. I'll thank everyone to keep their comments family-friendly, which means no cussing, Enoch. And no one is stealing your property. But I want to be transparent in all of this. The fact is that anyone could be forced to open their property temporarily for the task at hand. I don't like it either, but it's what the federal government says, so there's no need in fighting against it. Another man stood and shoved his fists in the air. Heck if we can't! I say we start a revolution and band together to fight against our crooked government. It may be time for the sick and tired citizens of America to stand up and overthrow the President, the Congress, the Senate, and everyone else who supports the trampling of our rights. Settle down, everyone, Sheriff Connor warned. As much as we'd like to do it, nobody will overturn anyone. Now, next question. I'm telling you, Connor, Don't you or your men show up expecting to seize my property because I ain't giving up my guns or my property. Not to you, and sure not to the federal government. I'll protect my land and my guns with force if I'm pushed. I'll kill them with the very guns they're trying to steal from me." Sheriff Connor glanced over the crowd as they erupted into a frenzy. He didn't bother trying to quiet them, and it took over a minute for it to die down. "I know you're angry, Enoch, and I also know you're a good man, not a cold-blooded murderer. That's just your stubbornness talking. Now sit down before I make you my first example of a good old-fashioned stoning ceremony." He turned to the other side of the room and gave them a good-natured wink. "Who wants to be in line to cast the first stone at our good friend Enoch?" The room filled with a ripple of light laughter. Next question. There were so many to choose from that he picked the first face he saw. Bev? A meek-looking waif of a woman stood to her feet. "I don't mean to put you on the spot, Sheriff, but do you support this gun confiscation?" "As the main law enforcer in this town, I'm required to—" A man jumped to his feet. "Don't you give us some cockamamie response that doesn't answer the question. That's what these crack-headed politicians do when they don't want to tell the truth, which is always. Now, we expect better of you because you're our friend. The least you can do is tell us what you really think." Connor weighed his words and decided to answer honestly. "I'll tell you what I think because you all are not only my neighbors, but you're also my friends. Personally, I don't support the government taking our firearms. It's an outright travesty. But if I want to keep my job, I must enforce what I'm told to enforce. If I don't do it, they'll send in someone who will, and we may not like who's sent to do the government's dirty work. I'm just asking you all to remember that at the end of the day, I'm just one of you who has been placed in a position that I didn't ask to be in. At heart, I'm still one of you, and I feel as much pain in this as you all do." He nodded at a man toward the back of the room. "Rodney Fields, you're up." "I'm sorry if this is a stupid question. People tell me I ain't the sharpest crayon in the box." He paused for a round of laughter. "I suppose you police will still have access to your guns?" Connor nodded. "Absolutely. We always have and always will be here to serve and protect our community with pride." "But you'll give up your personal guns too?" "I'm no exception to the rule. My only firearms will be the ones that come with the job. My personal guns will be confiscated just like yours." "But your work gun stays with you even off the clock, so you can still protect your home and your family," yelled a woman from the crowd. "You won't be a vulnerable sitting duck like all the rest of us." "You won't be sitting ducks. We'll amp up our service so that our community isn't left vulnerable. You have my word on that. You're a small force of 3 officers. What happens when someone tries to enter my home and none of you can come because you're over at Tom's house, or Edwin's house, or Catherine's house? What happens then?" Connor turned to the opposite side of the room. "Was that you, John Maxwell?" "Yes, we're a small force for a small community. Even now, while you still have your guns, if you needed to use it on anyone, you'd still have to call us. Now please, don't let your imagination run wild. Remember, our town has a very low crime rate, practically non-existent. I don't remember the last time I or any of my men answered a call for anything other than a minor legal issue. Sometimes I swear I feel like a criminal for taking my paycheck because I spend most of my days harassing Debbie over at the diner." "I can vouch that he's telling the truth on that one," Debbie called out. "I have oceanfront property down the street I'd like to sell you if you think things won't get dicey in this town. Heck, all over the country, once our guns are gone." A woman jumped up. "Yeah, it's all fine and good when we law-abiding citizens turn over our guns, but I want to know how many of you in this room know any," she raised her hands and air quoted, "decent law-abiding criminals." "She's right, Sheriff," called another man. "You're naive if you think all the thugs of the world will comply and get in line with the rest of us to turn over their guns. Criminals are bad people. They don't obey the law. How do you think the world will look within a matter of days when all the dregs of society realize they're the only ones who are still armed? I'll tell you how the world will look. All Hades will break loose, screamed another. He nodded toward another hand that shot up. Yeah, Martin. What happens if we decide not to participate in this government strong-arming? Will anyone ever really know? I know I don't have to tell you this, Martin, but the government has big ears and even bigger eyes. They're big brothering all of us within an inch of our lives, especially with the creation of the wonderful gadgets we like to call smartphones. Not to mention all of you who put your lives out there on social media. Trust me, you'd be terrified if you knew how much they had on you. I would encourage everyone to be good citizens and comply. Fine, I hear you, but what are the consequences if we don't? Martin persisted. I can't give you a definite answer on that yet, but without a doubt, the punishments will be swift and harsh. They may give the reluctant few who conveniently miss the deadline a slap on the wrist with a threatening letter or a fine, but mark my words, you don't want to face the consequences of noncompliance. If the government concludes that they have the right to strip us of our right to bear arms, rest assured that when their patience has been tested by those who refuse to obey, there will be stiff penalties, the least of which will be imprisonment and heavy fines. He threw his arm in the air in a gesture of surrender. But that's just my opinion. I haven't been told that in an official capacity. Would they do home searches? That would require a search warrant, wouldn't it? I don't know that they would search homes, but I reckon if they had ample reason to suspect a household was in legal possession of a gun, they would come knocking. He waited as another bristle of murmurs filled the room. Do you think they'd go so far as to send non-compliant people to the proverbial guillotine? I don't know, Sandy. Certainly not in the beginning, but once their patience wears thin with non-compliance, I wouldn't be surprised if they went to such lengths. Sounds like we're a step away from becoming communist China, if you ask me, said an old-timer in overalls. Sheriff Connor glanced over the audience and stopped on a young woman he didn't recognize. Lady in the black shirt, you're up, ma'am. She stood to her feet and offered an encouraging smile. Thank you, Sheriff, for patiently trying to answer all of our questions. I don't really have a question as much as a statement, but I want to say that I applaud this new amendment. I personally believe the world will be a much better and safer place when citizens are no longer armed. Her words were rewarded with a nominal sprinkling of applause. Then Sheriff Connor took a step back in shock when the room erupted into fierce protestations. In tandem, nearly every person in the room pushed to their feet and hurled insults and profanities at the woman. Everyone, calm down now. He bore into the room with a harsh stare as it collapsed into silence. This is an open floor meeting and all are welcome to voice their questions, concerns, and opinions without fear of being attacked. The manager of the auto parts store, who sat a row in front of the woman, turned and pushed his finger in her face. I invite you, young lady, to take your cracked liberal arts degree and move to communist China if you want to live with such an underhanded regime. But this is not how America works. 1, take your seat and calm down. I won't tolerate people sticking their hands in people's faces in such threatening manners. We're all adults here and we'll behave as such, or I'll ask you to leave. Connor gazed from one end of the room to the other. And that goes for every person in this room. He fielded questions and comments for over 2 hours and was exhausted when he finally drew the meeting to a close. As he stopped on his porch, the happenings of the night clutched his brain with a relentless grip. Will they search homes? Will they force people to the guillotine? The night's questions swirled in his mind, and without a doubt, sleep would not come easily. Will they force people to the guillotine? Probably not, but who could say for sure? He shoved his key in the lock, flung the door open, and tossed his keys into the bowl beside the door with a clatter. Within a few months, The state of the world could make the Salem witch trials feel like a warm and fuzzy time in history. Melodramatic? Maybe, maybe not.